Now that I have a couple of VMs deployed on host 1 and host 2, the next thing for us to go do would be to test the ping capability. So what I'm going to actually go do is I'm going to, I've been doing some ping tests. I'm going to hit the up arrow and I'm going to ping from 172.29.1.11 to .12. So the ping is working. I'm actually going to go ahead and minimize this. And you can see here that I have ICMP pings going back and forth, and we can see that they're encapsulated inside of VXLAN. So we know that's working from 11 to 12. That is the first thing that I wanted to show you. So we can validate the data plane in this respect. So I'm going to go back over here to this deployment, and I'm going to open up another tab. This tab, when we open it up here, will be allowing me to open up another connection to vCenter, but focus on the NSX specific pieces to it. So this will allow me to focus on the data center. This will allow me to focus on NSX. So I'm going to go to Menu, Networking and Security, and then I'm going to come down here to Logical Switches, and I'm going to create a new logical switch. I'm going to click on Add. I'll call this LS2-172.29.2.0, and then that's going to be the connection that I set up. The transport zone will be compute transport zone, so it's only going to work with inside of the compute cluster. I'm going to click on Add. Now that I have that, I'm going to click on this guy, and then I'm going to add VM. I'm going to go ahead and add 3 and 4 respectively, bump them over and click on Next, and then associate their VNICs to that particular logical switch, and then confirm the operation. Now I come over here, we can see that host 3, or VM3 is on host 2, attached to the logical switch 2, or VNI 5001, and on VM4, we're also associated to that same logical switch, but we're on the same host. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to migrate this guy to host 1. Actually, I'll move it to host 3. Click on host 3, click Next. The network is going to be the same. We're not messing around with that. And we're going to go ahead and vMotion him over there. Now I'm going to click on this guy. I'm going to go to load the web console. Same thing with this guy. I'm going to launch the web console just like that. And console has been disconnected. Let me actions power off. I'm going to go ahead and power that guy off. And then let me go to LBM4, launch the web console. It might be a little tricky to do that because he's in the middle of a vMotion. So we're on host 2, click launch web, or actually cancel. Come back up here. Alright, here we go. I'm going to come in here and type in the password. I'll give it an IP address, right? And right click here, edit connections, select this guy, click on edit, and then IPv4 settings, we're going to set it to manual, add a setting. And then in here we'll type in 172.29.2.13/24 to 172.29.2.1. And then we're going to put in Google as our DNS server. Eventually we will have internet. Now I'm going to go ahead and close that out. I'm going to right click and go open terminal. Now I'm not going to be able to ping between Linux LVM4 and LVM1. And let me double check LVM3. Let's go ahead and power him on and give him a couple of minutes. So if I was to ping 172.29.2.1, I get an unreachable, meaning that it can't actually reach out. And let's try that again. He's trying, I get a destination host unreachable, which is completely fine in this particular scenario because I have no connectivity. I'm actually going to cancel that. And what we have to do in order to ping either a default gateway or ping 1.12 or 1.11 in this case here, I need to be able to route between my VNIs. And right now I can't do that because I don't have any layer 3 capability in play to actually do that. So what I'm going to do is I have to come back over here to the NSX edges, and I'm going to go ahead and add an DLR, a distributed logical router. The DLR, essentially, when you go and configure it, will go switch this over to red just so it's easy. All right, let's go black. When you have a DLR, you're going to have a couple of hosts, right? And these hosts are going to be, they're going to have a couple of VMs. So we'll say VM1, we'll have VM3, we'll have VM2, and VM4. We're going to associate VM1 and VM2 to the same logical switch, and then we're going to run VM3 and VM4 to the same logical switch. VM3 and VM4 would be able to talk to each other, and VM1 and VM2 will be able to talk to each other because they're on the same logical switch. So we have LS1 and we have LS2. Now if I wanted to route between them, I need to add in a distributed logical router. Now the DLR actually exists down here. We'll say the DLR is down here, DLR and DLR. What this DLR is, it's actually a kernel. It's a kernel module that gets turned on at the ESXi host level. And basically there are, since the logical switches actually exist inside of the host itself, the DLR has a interface that it connects to each one of the logical switches. This is known as a logical interface, or a LIF. The opposite to that is going to be a uplink. The uplink is going to provide us connectivity outside of our network. The DLR is going to connect to each one of the logical switches, and the DLR will be our default gateway, but it's spread amongst all of the ESXi hosts. So what's going to end up happening when I create a DLR and associate it to a cluster, these guys right here are both in a cluster. So this is one big cluster. No pun intended. So this is a cluster. As soon as I associate a DLR to a particular cluster, the DLR is automatically going to be pushed down and installed into the different ESXi hosts that I have running. Now there's a couple different ways that you can deploy this. You can deploy the DLR by itself, and it'll work just fine. You're able to manipulate it and things like that. There's a couple different ways that you can control it, see what's happening to it and stuff like that. This way here is going to require you to navigate to the ESXi host, and then once you're on the ESXi host, you'll be able to log in and run the net VDR command. The net VDR, or the virtual distributed router, is a command set that you can run to gather information about what the DLR is doing. However, there's another way of deploying the DLR, which gives us more flexibility, more control, and that's the DLR with a control VM. Think of this like a centralized controller for the distributed logical router. The Edge Services Gateway is basically what this is. So it's ESG Lite, as I like to refer to it. It's not all the same things that an ESG can do, but a lot of the similar things, but not everything. what's cool about doing this is as you're working with this as a solution, what you end up doing is you deploy the edge services or the control VM on your management cluster, and you end up integrating the devices together. Now, one problem that we have right now is both of these logical switches are tied to the compute cluster. So the question is, how do I get a control VM to be installed on the management cluster, but to also have reachability back over to the compute cluster? The answer to that question is, for the logical switches here, we actually have to move them to a transport zone that supports both the compute and the management cluster. So they need to be in a transport zone that supports both. So that means we're going to have to go and create some new logical switches, and we're going to have to configure them to support a transport zone that covers both clusters. Pretty easy to do, and then we'll just reconfigure the logical switches and we'll move the VMs from one logical switch to the other. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Go ahead and clear the screen. I'm going to go over here to logical switches. I'm going to go ahead and create a new logical switch. I'll call this LS3, and LS3 will be we'll call this DLR1, and we'll put a -con. And basically the idea for this would be I'm connecting to the DLR for connectivity, and the transport zone, you guessed it, it's going to be the transport zone that covers both compute and management. Click on add. So that's going to be 1. Actually, let me go ahead and edit the name. We'll say LS connect con 1. Save that number, and then we're going to go ahead and add another one. We're going to call this LS4-DLR-con 2. Click on the transport zone that covers both of the clusters. There we go. And then on this guy here, I'm going to go ahead and remove VM. I'm going to remove LVM1 and LVM2 respectively. Remove. And then I'm also going to remove, oops, click on this guy here, remove LVM3 and LVM4. I'm going to go ahead and on this guy here, I'm going to add VM. I'll add LVM1 and 2, bump them over to the right, next. Select the NICs that need to be associated, next, and then finish. And then I'm going to do the same thing for virtual wire 4. I'm going to add VM. 3 and 4 are going to get added. Bump that to the right, click next, select the NICs, select next, and finish. Alright, now that I've got that squared away, the next thing I'll have to do is go back to the NSX edges. I'm going to go ahead and add a DLR, and I'm going to add a control VM. So I'm going to just put in here DC1-DLR1. And I could add a host name, a tenant, and everything else, but I'm not going to do with that. I'm going to deploy a control VM, which deploys edge appliance VM to support firewall and dynamic routing. It gives us more capabilities. I'm going to click next, and I'm going to start issuing the information to it that needs to be available. So the password, I'm going to enable SSH mode, click next. I'm going to add an edge appliance. The edge appliance is going to go into the management cluster in the DS1 data store. Click next, connect it to, and I'm going to connect this to a DBPG, and I'm going to associate this to the management port group. I'm not actually going to use it to connect to, it's just there. And click on next. I'm going to add some interfaces. The first interface that I'm going to add is going to be we'll put in LVM 1-2. It's going to be an internal. We're going to connect this guy to DLR1 con, because that's what we're going to be able to put it on. Because you notice the other logical switches don't show up, and the reason they don't show up is because they are not in the management cluster. Click OK, and then I'm going to add an IP address here, which will be 172.29. In this case here will be 2.1, and the prefix length will be /24. Actually, this will be 1.1. Click on OK, and then I'm going to add another one. This guy here will be DC1 DLR, or I'm sorry, this will be, we'll do LVM 3 through 4. This will be an internal link. I'm going to associate that to con2. Click OK. Add this, I'll put in here as 172.29.2.1/24. Click OK. Okay, so I have my two logical interfaces, or my LIFs. Click on Next. I'm not going to configure a default gateway for right now because I don't actually even have the ability of associating anything to a default gateway. Click Next and then Finish. So what's going to end up happening is that DLR is going to get pushed and it's going to get deployed right here. So what's cool about this is once this is deployed, what we'll be able to do is come in here on this host, on the management cluster. As soon as this guy is deployed, we'll actually be able to launch the web console to it, and we'll be able to connect to it. And this is the control VM, because if we wanted to look at any one of the specific hosts and go down to the host level and run ESXi host commands in order to pull out the DLR information, it's kind of difficult to pull that off unless you know the syntax off the top of your head. So if I was to come in here and say launch web console, this will allow us to log into the console of the control VM, and we're going to have access basically to the device itself. And so we're just about done deploying. This will continue to refresh until the device is completely deployed. And I think we are just about there. Almost. It's got a little bit more to go. And then once that's done, we'll be able to use this guy. We'll go ahead and type in admin and the password. Here we're logged in. I'm going to go back over here to NSX Edges, and now it's deployed. Now you'll notice that when we click on this guy, it says NSX Edge 1-0. If I go back over here to this guy and I click on here, remember when we were configuring it, we look at the host name. If we were to come in here and say, you know, the host name was just horrible, you know, NSX Edge 1, guess what shows up right here? NSX Edge 1. So if I was to do a question mark and do a show question mark, I could say interface and hit the enter key. And as you can see, as I come down here, I have the VDR, which shows me my IP address of 172.29.1.1. Come down a little bit further, and I have some of my other interfaces that are here. Alright, so now if I go back to LVM4, oh, somehow that guy disconnected. LVM1, okay, he's good. So let me go ahead and log into him real quick. Okay, so he's actively pinging stuff. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to ping 172.29.1.1, and I can ping my default gateway. If I go back over here and I pick on LVM3, LVM3 is good to go. I'm going to go ahead and launch web console. Go ahead and log into him. We'll go ahead and get him a quick configuration because we couldn't do that earlier. Go ahead and edit connections. We'll give him 172.29.2.13. Go ahead and edit this. IPv4 settings, set to manual, add, be 172.29.2.13/24, 172.29.2.1, and then the gateway and the set, and we're going to go ahead and do a Google DNS. Click on save. And with that being done, the connection is now established. I'm going to right click and go open terminal. I'm going to do a ping to 172.29.2.1. I can ping my default gateway. And if I come up to LBM, move this over a little bit, LBM1, and I do an IF config, this guy here is 172.29.1.11. So in here, I'll hit the up arrow. I'll do 1.11, and I can ping it. That means that I have inter-VNI routing, or east-west communication is being done between the devices that I have set up here. And that's really the big winner here. Now if I come over here to the DLR and I do a show IP route, you're going to see that I have these connected interfaces and they're working as you would expect them to. Now there's no default gateway, none of that type of stuff is here, but at least I have the control VM, which allows me to manage this device that much more effectively. So if I was to come in here and look at any of the config that I have, we do a show interfaces, we'll do IF, we'll do vNIC1. Let's we have VDR. Oh, that's my mistake. So let me go ahead and hit the up arrow. We'll do vNIC_1. Right, so we can look at the individual devices. So with that being said, we have everything laid out that we need to in terms of the operations. The next thing we're going to have to go test out would be the Edge Services Gateway and see exactly how that comes into play so we can do some of the more advanced routing and things like that. Now if I was to take this a step further, I could go to the controller node and get logical switches and a bunch of other stuff. This, at least now, the connectivity is more like this. My connectivity is basically set up to where I have a DLR now, and with a control VM, and then on the DLR I have LS1 and I have LS2. They're both terminating on the DLR, and I have VM1 and VM2 that are and I have VM1 and VM2, VM3 and VM4 connected. So that means that if this guy's on host 1 and this guy's on host 2, let's say this guy's on host 3 and this guy's on host 1. What this is going to mean is if I want to route from, or if I want to ping this way, right, inside of the same logical switch, that's fine. I don't need to go through a DLR to get there. I just need to send the ping to my VTEP right here. So the VTEP is how this is going to get connected. And then that goes to this guy, this VTEP. And then the traffic is then going to be able to go back and forth. And that's how the pings are going to happen here. Now, if I'm on VM1 and I want to go to VM3, I do a very similar thing. The only difference between the two is I need to route to my DLR. Then the DLR will put you on the right logical switch. Then the logical switch will bump you down here. So it is you bridge, route, bridge. So you bring the traffic into the DLR, right? And then once the traffic is brought on the DLR, because the DLR sits on the host, right? Because the DLR sits on the host, you're going to bring traffic in, which is going to be a bridge. Then if you want to route to another network, then you got to go to the DLR, and then from here you get to where you got to go. So you bridge in, then you route across to the DLR. So the DLR will receive the traffic, and then because the DLR is in the same logical switch as this VTEP, it's able to receive the traffic, and everything gets where it's got to go. So with that being said, that is pretty much it for this basic overview of how the DLR comes into play and all that good stuff. Until next time, guys, thanks so much for stopping by and hanging out with me, and I'll catch all of you in the next video.